By the time Elara was finished, nobody in that opulent dining room was laughing. But they were all laughing when Julian's lawyer, a man with a smile as thin and sharp as a paper cut, slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It landed in front of her with a quiet, dismissive thud, a stack of pages bound in a severe navy blue cover. The laughter was not loud or boisterous. It was a low, confident, and deeply insulting simmer of amusement that filled the spaces between the clinking of crystal and the pretentious scrape of silver on porcelain. It was the laughter of people who believed they held all the cards, who saw her as nothing more than a pretty, temporary accessory to their world of inherited wealth and ruthless ambition. Elara stared at the document. The gold-embossed letters on the cover seemed to mock her. Prenuptial agreement. Her heart, which had been fluttering with a nervous but happy energy just moments before, felt as if it had been plunged into ice water. She looked up, her eyes seeking out Julian, her fiancé of 2 years. He was seated at the head of the table, a king in his own palatial dining room, a smug, proprietary smile playing on his handsome face. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if granting her permission to be shocked, but not for too long. "It's just a formality, darling," Julian's mother, Beatrice, chirped from her right. Her voice was like crushed velvet over broken glass. "In our world, these things are simply done. A matter of good housekeeping." She took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes glittering with something that was not kindness. The other family members and their close, equally wealthy friends assembled for this pre-wedding dinner murmured in agreement, their expressions ranging from pitying to predatory. Elara's hands felt cold and distant. She could not bring herself to touch the document. It felt like a snake coiled on the table, waiting to strike. Her voice, when it finally came, was a whisper. "A prenup? Julian, we never talked about this." She looked at him, her gaze pleading for an explanation, for a sign that this was all some terrible, elaborate joke. He finally spoke, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "There was nothing to talk about, Elara. It's standard. My family's assets must be protected. Our legacy." He gestured around the room, at the silk wallpapered walls, the heavy damask curtains, the ancestral portraits staring down with cold, judgmental eyes. He was not talking about their future legacy. He was talking about his. She was not part of the our. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "If you'll turn to page 3, you'll see the primary clause. In the event of a dissolution of the marriage, you will walk away with a one-time payment of $50,000 for each year of marriage. You will, of course, relinquish any and all claims to any assets, properties, or business interests held now or in the future by Mr. Blackwood or the Blackwood family estate." He said it with a practiced, almost bored finality. He had delivered this speech many times before. $50,000. For a moment, the number just hung in the air, meaningless. Then the insult of it began to burn. She had given up her small apartment, put her own modest career in graphic design on hold, and moved into his life, managing his home, hosting his events, supporting his burgeoning business. She had poured her heart, her time, and her very soul into their shared life. And her contribution was being valued at the price of a mid-range sedan per year. But it was the next part that truly broke her. "Furthermore," Sterling continued, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on another section, "any intellectual property, brand names, or proprietary knowledge contributed during the marriage is considered a gift to the primary asset holder, which is Mr. Blackwood." The air left her lungs. Intellectual property. Brand names. A cold dread, sharp and specific, began to crawl up her spine. She looked at Julian, a new, horrifying understanding dawning in her eyes. His company, Ethelgard Finishes, the one that had exploded in popularity over the last 18 months, the one built on unique, artisanal wood treatments, it was all based on her. It was all from her. Julian saw the shift in her expression. The smugness on his face hardened into something colder, more threatening. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping so only she could hear it across the corner of the table. "Sign it, Elara. Don't make this difficult. Let's be honest. You are nothing without me. You bring nothing to this table but yourself. This is more than generous. You are nothing without me." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The room swam. The smiling, predatory faces blurred into a grotesque tableau of wealth and power. She felt small, insignificant, and utterly, devastatingly foolish. How had she been so blind? How had she mistaken his calculated interest for love? All the pieces began to click into place, forming a picture of betrayal so complete it was almost artistic in its cruelty. She finally reached for the document, her fingers trembling. She did not open it. She just rested her hand on the cover, feeling the cold weight of it. She looked up, not at Julian, but at the faces around the table. She saw the expectant smirks, the barely concealed contempt. They were waiting for her to cry, to argue, to make a scene that they could dine out on for weeks. They were waiting for the poor, naive girl to finally understand her place. She took a slow, deep breath, the icy air steadying her. She pushed the document back across the table toward the lawyer. A quiet dignity settled over her, a strange calm that felt alien, even to herself. It was the calm of a person who had just lost everything and realized in that same instant that she had nothing left to lose. "I'll need to have my own lawyer review this," she said, her voice even and clear, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. Beatrice let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Your own lawyer? Darling, who is going to pay for that? We have Mr. Sterling right here. He can explain anything you don't understand." Elara stood up, her chair making a soft scraping sound on the antique rug. Every eye was on her. She looked directly at Julian, her expression now unreadable. The hurt was still there, a deep, cavernous wound, but something else was beginning to form in its depths, a flicker of cold, hard resolve. "Thank you for dinner," she said to the room at large. Then her eyes settled back on Julian. "I'll be in the guest room." She turned and walked out of the dining room, her back straight, her steps measured. She did not run. She did not falter. She could feel their collective gaze on her back, a physical weight of judgment and dismissal. She heard Julian call her name, a note of irritation in his voice, but she did not stop. The moment the heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the sound of their renewed, confident laughter, the first tear finally escaped and traced a hot path down her cold cheek. They thought they had won. They thought they had put her in her place. They had no idea what they had just begun. They had no idea that the name on his company, the very foundation of his success, was not just a brand. It was a promise, and it was a legacy she had inherited long before she ever met him. The story of Ethelgard didn't begin in a sleek corporate boardroom or a marketing meeting. It began 30 years earlier in a dusty, sun-drenched workshop that smelled perpetually of sawdust, turpentine, and old secrets. It began with her grandfather, Arthur Vance, a man whose hands were as gnarled as the oak he so often worked with, but whose touch was surprisingly gentle. Arthur was not just a carpenter or a furniture restorer. He was an artisan, a throwback to a time when craftsmanship was a form of devotion. He believed that wood had a soul, and his job was to coax it out, to let it sing. Elara had spent most of her childhood weekends in that workshop, her small hands trying to mimic his large, capable ones. He never treated her like a child who was in the way. He treated her like an apprentice. He taught her how to read the grain of a piece of timber, to understand its history and its potential. He showed her how to sand with the grain, never against it, a lesson he often said applied to people as much as it did to wood. "You don't force things, Ellie Bell," he would say, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "You work with what's already there. You reveal the beauty. You don't invent it." His true genius, however, was not in the shaping of the wood, but in the finishing of it. Over decades of obsessive experimentation, Arthur had developed a series of unique, all-natural stains, waxes, and oils. They were his life's work, brewed in small, careful batches from secret recipes of beeswax, carnauba, tung oil, and obscure plant resins he sourced from specialty growers. These were not mere coatings. They were treatments that nourished the wood from within, creating a depth of color and a lustrous, hand-rubbed patina that modern chemical finishes could never replicate. His finishes made wood look ancient and alive at the same time. He documented everything in a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was his Bible. Inside, in his spidery, elegant script, were not just the formulas, but the stories behind them. He wrote down the exact temperature of the wax, the humidity of the day, the type of wood he was testing it on, and his philosophical musings on the results. He gave his formulas names drawn from mythology and history. Persephone's kiss, for a dark, rich stain that brought out deep reds. Wainamunen's oil, for a treatment that made birchwood seem to glow from within. When Elara was 16, a local historical society commissioned her grandfather to restore the intricate woodwork in a century-old library. The project was massive, his crowning achievement. As they worked together, side by side, he decided his collection of finishes needed a unifying name, a brand that encompassed his entire philosophy. They sat for hours on upturned buckets in the quiet workshop, brainstorming. "It needs to be something strong," Arthur had said, wiping his hands on an oily rag. "Something that speaks of protection, of guarding a legacy, because that's what we're doing here. We're not just slapping on varnish. We are protecting this history for the future." Elara, a lover of old words and stories, had been flipping through a dictionary of Old English. She stumbled upon a word. "What about Ethelgard?" she suggested tentatively. "It's from Ethel, meaning noble, and geared, meaning enclosure or protection. A noble protector." Arthur's face had broken into a rare, wide smile. He loved it. "Ethelgard," he repeated, the word feeling solid and ancient on his tongue. "Ethelgard finishes. Perfect." He opened the ledger, and on the very first page, in beautiful, flowing script, he wrote the name. Beneath it, he wrote, "Property of Arthur Vance and his heir, Elara Vance." He had her sign her name next to his. "This is yours now too, Ellie Bell," he had told her, his expression serious. "This knowledge, this legacy, it's more valuable than money because it's real. Never forget that." She never did. After Arthur passed away a few years later, he left her the workshop and everything in it. The most precious inheritance, of course, was the leather ledger. She kept it safe, wrapped in oilcloth, a tangible link to the man who had shaped her more than any other. She didn't have his genius for chemistry, but she had his eye and his heart. She understood the philosophy. She used the finishes for her own small projects. Restoring old furniture she found at flea markets, the familiar smells a comforting balm for her grief. Then she met Julian. He was charming, ambitious, and utterly captivating. He worked for his family's high-end construction firm, which specialized in luxury home renovations. When he first saw a small, antique writing desk she had restored in her apartment, he was mesmerized. "My God, Elara, this finish is incredible," he'd said, running his hand over the impossibly smooth surface. "It looks like it's 1,000 years old, but brand new. Where did you get this?" Proudly, she told him the story of her grandfather, of his workshop, his secret formulas, and the name they had chosen together, Ethelgard. She showed him the ledger, letting him leaf through the pages filled with Arthur's careful script. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes she mistook for awe. It was not. It was avarice. He began to visit her more often, always full of questions. He framed it as a gentle, loving interest in her hobby. "You should do something with this, you know," he'd say. "This is too good to just be for you." He planted the seed of an idea, a dangerous one. He suggested they could partner up. He had the business connections. She had the legacy. "We could build something amazing, Elara," he'd whispered to her one night, his arms wrapped around her. "A company. We'll call it Ethelgard Finishes, just like you and your grandfather wanted. A tribute to him. We'll share it, 50-50. She was hesitant. The ledger felt too sacred, her grandfather's work too personal to be commercialized. "I don't know, Julian. This was his soul. I don't want it to be cheapened." "Cheapened? Darling, we'll do the opposite. We'll make his name legendary. Everyone in the luxury market will know the name Arthur Vance. Isn't that what he would have wanted?" He was so convincing, so passionate, and she was in love. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to share her world with him, and the most precious part of her world was contained in that ledger. So she agreed. In the beginning, it felt like a true partnership. She spent weeks in the old workshop with him, carefully mixing the formulas, explaining the nuances of each one. She showed him which resins needed to be heated slowly, which oils needed to cure for weeks. He was a quick study, taking copious notes, his mind sharp and retentive. He handled the business side, the incorporation, the marketing, the client meetings. He insisted on putting the company under the umbrella of his family's firm, Blackwood Construction, for logistical and financial simplicity. He assured her the paperwork listing him as the sole director was just a formality to get things moving quickly. "We'll fix all the ownership details later, darling. We're a team. Our handshake is what matters." She trusted him. She let him scan the pages of the ledger into his computer for backup. She watched as he took her grandfather's legacy and turned it into a marketing masterpiece. The Ethelgard brand, with its story of a reclusive old artisan and his secret formulas, was an instant sensation in the world of high-end design. Architects and builders clamored for it. The business exploded. But as the money rolled in, things began to change. Her role was slowly, subtly diminished. The workshop was no longer needed. He had a lab now, he said, for scaling up production. Her input on the formulas was brushed aside. "We have chemists for that now, Elara. We need consistency, mass production. Your grandfather's methods are wonderful, but they aren't scalable." He began to talk about Ethelgard as something he had discovered, a hidden gem he had polished. The story of Arthur Vance was still part of the marketing, but Julian was now the hero of the narrative, the visionary who had brought this old-world magic to the modern market. She had tried to talk to him about it, about the 50-50 partnership they had agreed on, about getting her name on the official documents. He always had an excuse. "The accountants say it's too complicated right now with the tax structure. The lawyers advise against changing the corporate structure during a growth phase." "Don't you trust me, darling?" And foolishly, she did. She loved him, and she believed that deep down he loved her too, and that he would eventually do the right thing. Now, standing in the cold, sterile guest room of the mansion his business, her business, had paid for, the prenup's cruel words echoed in her head. Any intellectual property is considered a gift. It was not a mistake. It was not an oversight. It was the final brutal move in a long, calculated game of theft. He had not just stolen her grandfather's formulas. He had stolen their story, their name, her legacy. He had taken the most precious thing she had and was now trying to discard her like a piece of trash, armed with a legal document designed to leave her with nothing. She walked over to the window and looked out at the perfectly manicured gardens, illuminated by landscape lighting. She felt a profound, bottomless grief, not just for herself, but for Arthur. She had let him down. She had allowed his life's work, his very soul, to be corrupted and stolen by a man who saw it only as a path to wealth and status. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. But then, another feeling began to stir beneath the pain. It was a slow-burning ember of rage. The image of Julian's smug face. The sound of his mother's condescending laugh. The sight of that predatory lawyer. It all coalesced into a single, hard point of anger in her chest. He had called her nothing. He thought she was nothing. He had grossly, catastrophically underestimated her. He thought the ledger was just a collection of recipes he could digitize and replicate. He didn't understand. The real value was not just in the formulas themselves. It was in the philosophy. It was in the knowledge that her grandfather had passed down to her, the knowledge of why they worked, the nuances he had never bothered to learn. And it was in the name itself. Ethelgard, noble protector. A new resolve hardened within her. She would not be a victim. She would not let him destroy her grandfather's legacy. She was Arthur Vance's heir. It was time she started acting like it. She pulled out her phone, her fingers no longer trembling. She scrolled through her contacts and found the one person she knew would understand, the one person who would be in her corner without question. Her best friend, Chloe. The phone rang twice before Chloe picked up, her voice warm and groggy. "Elara, it's almost midnight. Is everything okay? Did the dinner with the in-laws from hell finally kill you?" Elara took a shaky breath. "Chloe," she said, her voice low and tight. "I need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I need a shark." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Chloe's voice was instantly sharp and alert. "What did he do?" "He did everything," Elara replied, the anger finally beginning to eclipse the hurt. "And I'm going to take it all back." Chloe didn't hesitate. "Good," she said, her voice fierce with loyalty. "It's about damn time. I'll make some calls. We'll find you a great white." After hanging up, Elara walked over to her weekender bag. Tucked away in a side pocket, wrapped carefully in an old silk scarf, was a small, worn notebook. It wasn't the main ledger, but a personal journal her grandfather had kept in his final years. It was filled with more than just formulas. It held his thoughts, his frustrations, and his warnings. She hadn't looked at it in years. Now, a sudden, urgent instinct told her to open it. She sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through the familiar, faded pages. Near the back, she found an entry she'd never paid much attention to before. It was dated shortly after Julian had started scaling up the business. Arthur had, in his last months, become aware of Julian's methods through a friend who worked in the supply chain. The entry read, "He is a fool. He thinks the formula is a recipe. He does not understand the soul of it. He is using Brazilian Carnauba No. 3 instead of number 1. Cheaper, faster. But it will become brittle. In 18 to 24 months, it will yellow and crack under direct sunlight. He is selling a lie. A beautiful, expensive lie with a ticking clock. I created Ethelgard to protect, not to deceive. This boy uses the name as a shield for his own greed. Elara's blood ran cold. It wasn't just theft, it was fraud. Julian wasn't just using her grandfather's name. He was actively destroying its reputation with inferior products. He was selling ticking time bombs to his wealthy clients, all under the banner of her family's legacy of quality. She closed the notebook, a chilling clarity washing over her. This wasn't just about a trademark anymore. This was about justice. Julian hadn't just built a business on her legacy. He'd built it on a foundation of lies that was, according to her grandfather's own expert prediction, about to crumble. And she was going to be the one to light the match. The next morning, Elara felt like a ghost in the opulent house. She moved quietly, packing a larger suitcase, her mind a whirlwind of strategy and sorrow. Julian had tried to speak with her, knocking on the guest room door with a mix of impatience and feigned concern. "Elara, don't be childish. We need to talk about this." She ignored him. She had nothing left to say to the man on the other side of that door. Her conversation now would be with a lawyer. By noon, Chloe had come through. She had a name, Marcus Davies. He wasn't a divorce lawyer. He was a notoriously tough, terrifyingly smart intellectual property litigator, known for dismantling corporate giants. He was expensive, and he didn't take every case. Chloe had called in a favor with a partner at her firm to get Elara a consultation that very afternoon. Elara slipped out of the house while Julian was on a conference call, his voice booming with false confidence from his home office. She took a taxi to a sleek, anonymous glass tower downtown. The offices of Davies and Finch were intimidatingly quiet, all brushed steel and muted gray. Mr. Davies himself was a man in his late 50s with piercing blue eyes and an air of intense, unnerving calm. He listened to her story without interruption, his face betraying no emotion. Elara laid it all out: her grandfather, the workshop, the ledger, the handshake deal, the stolen name, the prenup, and finally, the damning entry from her grandfather's journal. When she was finished, she slid the journal across the vast desk, her heart pounding. Mr. Davies put on a pair of reading glasses and read the entry about the Brazilian carnauba wax. He read it twice. He then looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was the same look she'd seen on Julian's face when he first saw the ledger. But where Julian's was greed, Davies was the keen interest of a predator catching the scent of blood in the water. "He never legally registered the trademark Ethelgard in your name or as a partnership?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. "No," Elara admitted, feeling a flush of shame. "I was naive. He registered it under his own name, as a subsidiary of his family's company." "And you have the original ledger? The one where your grandfather wrote the name and designated you as his heir?" "Yes, it's in a safe deposit box." "Good," Davies said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "A brand is not just a name you file in an office. It's a story. It's goodwill. It's the origin. You, Miss Vance, are the origin. You have prior use. You have a documented chain of legacy. What he has is a piece of paper he filed after the fact, based on information he acquired under false pretenses." He leaned back in his chair. "This prenup is a nasty piece of work, but it may be his undoing. It explicitly mentions intellectual property, which proves he knew it had value and that you were the source of it. He's trying to retroactively classify your life's inheritance as a gift. The courts do not look kindly on that kind of blatant deception. especially between fiancé. Then he tapped the journal. But this is the canon. If what your grandfather wrote is true, and Julian Blackwood is knowingly selling a defective product under a premium brand name, that's not just a trademark dispute. That's mass consumer fraud. That's wire fraud. That's a corporate implosion waiting to happen. A wave of relief so intense it almost made her dizzy washed over Elara. For the first time in 24 hours, she felt like she could breathe. So, you'll take the case? Mr. Davies removed his glasses. Miss Vance, I am going to do more than take your case. I am going to dismantle Julian Blackwood's empire piece by piece. His lawyer said you'd walk away with nothing. I have a feeling that by the time we are done, it is he who will have nothing. But we have to be smart. We can't just sue. We need to build an airtight trap. The plan was audacious and terrifying. Phase 1 was strategic silence. Davies advised her to return to the house and, as painful as it would be, pretend to be considering the prenup. Let him think he has you cornered, Davies explained. Let him get comfortable. Arrogant men make mistakes when they're comfortable. Phase 2 was investigation. Davies hired a private investigator, a discreet former financial crimes detective, to dig into Ethelgard Finish's corporate structure and financials. He also tasked a chemical analysis lab with acquiring samples of the Ethelgard products currently on the market and testing them against the original formulas, which Elara would provide from the ledger. Returning to that house was one of the hardest things Elara had ever done. She had to sit at the dinner table with Julian and Beatrice, enduring their smug glances and condescending advice. Julian was relieved she had come to her senses. He was magnanimous in his victory, which only made her stomach turn. I knew you'd see it was for the best, darling, he said, squeezing her hand. His touch felt like a spider crawling on her skin. She had to force herself not to recoil. She played the part of the chastened, compliant fiancé, telling him she was just waiting for her lawyer to do a quick, procedural review. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but the memory of Davies' cold confidence kept her focused. The next few weeks were a surreal exercise in duplicity. By day, she was the placid bride-to-be, discussing flower arrangements with Beatrice and nodding along to Julian's monologues about his business triumphs. By night, she was a co-conspirator, having hushed, encrypted calls with Davies and his team, reviewing the information they were unearthing. And the information was damning. The private investigator quickly discovered that Julian's deception went far deeper than she could have ever imagined. He had set up a series of shell corporations to purchase the cheaper, inferior raw materials, including the Brazilian Carnauba No. 3 wax. He would then sell these materials to his own company, Ethelgard Finishes, at a massively inflated price, effectively siphoning millions of dollars from the company's profits before they were ever reported on the main ledger. It was a classic embezzlement scheme designed to defraud not only his customers, but also his own family, who were minority shareholders in the parent company, Blackwood Construction. He was hiding the profits in offshore accounts. Meanwhile, the lab results came in. They confirmed Arthur's prediction with chilling accuracy. The commercially sold Ethelgard Finish showed clear signs of chemical instability. Under accelerated UV and temperature testing, the finish yellowed, grew brittle, and began to form microscopic cracks. The lab report concluded that the product would likely begin to fail within 2 to 3 years of application, not the decades of durability the brand promised. They were indeed selling a beautiful lie. Mr. Davies was ecstatic. "We have him," he said during a clandestine meeting in a quiet corner of a museum cafe. "We have him on trademark infringement, breach of fiduciary duty, consumer fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement. We can destroy him in court." But Elara shook her head. A slow, cold fury had taken root in her heart, and it demanded a different kind of justice. A courtroom battle would take years. It would be fought behind closed doors, a war of motions and depositions. The world would never truly know what he did. His humiliation had been public. His downfall had to be public too. "No," she said, her voice steady. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. His entire world will be there. All the people who watched him humiliate me, all the clients he's defrauded, his family. That's the stage I want. I don't want to just sue him. I want to expose him." Davies looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. He had expected tears and a desire for a quick settlement. He had not expected a strategist. "A public execution," he murmured, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "I like it. It's dramatic, but it's risky. We'll have one shot to do it perfectly." The final piece of the plan fell into place. They would let the wedding proceed. Davies would prepare a comprehensive package of evidence. A formal notice of trademark ownership transfer based on prior use, a cease and desist letter, summaries of the investigator's financial findings, and the damning lab report. He would also have marshals on standby, ready to serve Julian with a civil lawsuit and notify the district attorney's office of the criminal fraud evidence at the precise moment. Elara's role was the most difficult. She had to walk down the aisle. She had to stand at the altar with the man who had betrayed her so profoundly. She had to wait for the perfect moment. The officiant would ask if anyone had just cause why they should not be married. That would be her cue. The days leading up to the wedding were the longest of her life. The mask of the happy bride was growing heavier with each passing hour. Julian was at his most insufferable, basking in the glow of his success and his impending marriage to the beautiful, compliant woman he thought he had broken. The final provocation came the night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner held at a lavish country club. In front of 50 of their closest friends and family, Julian stood to give a toast. He raised his glass of champagne, his eyes finding Elara's across the table. "To my beautiful bride, Elara," he began, his voice oozing with condescending charm, "who has finally seen the light and agreed that love and business are best kept separate." He smirked. "I'm so glad we got that little piece of paper sorted out. Now we can focus on what really matters, her becoming Mr. Julian Blackwood." The room erupted in sycophantic laughter. He was mocking her again, reminding everyone of her initial defiance and ultimate submission. He was taking a victory lap on her dignity. Elara felt a hot flush of shame, but she met his gaze and held it. She gave him a small, tight smile. It was the smile of a predator that knows the trap has been set, and the prey is about to take the final, fatal step. He mistook it for surrender. It was the last mistake he would ever make with her. She thought of her grandfather's words. "You don't force things. You work with what's already there. You reveal the beauty. You don't invent it." Julian had tried to force her into a box, to invent a narrative of his own genius. She was about to reveal the truth that had been there all along. The day of the wedding dawned bright and painfully beautiful. The ceremony was to be held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, a place of soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and overwrought floral arrangements. It was a monument to the Blackwood family's wealth and status, the perfect stage for the drama about to unfold. Elara felt a strange, surreal calm as her hair and makeup were done. She was an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. She put on the ridiculously expensive couture gown Julian had insisted upon, its weight a physical representation of the lies she had been carrying. Walking down the aisle on the arm of a distant uncle, her only remaining family, was an out-of-body experience. The room was filled with hundreds of faces. She saw the captains of industry Julian had sold his defective products to. She saw the society mavens who had whispered about her behind their hands. She saw Beatrice in the front row, beaming with triumph, the queen mother who had secured her dynasty. And at the end of the aisle, she saw Julian, his face alight with arrogant pride. He looked at her as if she were his most prized acquisition. She took her place opposite him. The scent of thousands of white roses was cloying, suffocating. The officiant, a genial man in his 60s, began the ceremony with practiced platitudes about love and partnership. Elara's heart was a steady, cold drum in her chest. She could feel the presence of Mr. Davies, who was seated discreetly in the third row, looking for all the world like just another wedding guest. His calm demeanor was a source of strength. They went through the motions, the readings, the vows Julian had written himself, full of empty promises about honor and cherish. When it was her turn, she simply repeated the traditional vows, her voice clear and emotionless. Julian didn't seem to notice. He was too caught up in his own performance. Finally, the moment came. The officiant smiled warmly. And now, if there is anyone present who can show just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A profound silence fell over the grand ballroom. This was the part of the ceremony that was always a formality, a quaint, archaic tradition. The guests shuffled their feet, ready for the final pronouncement and the champagne that would follow. In the silence, Elara took one small step back from the altar. She turned her head slightly, not to the audience, but to the officiant. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried with absolute clarity in the stillness. "I do," she said. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Julian looked at her, his smile faltering, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Darling, that's not your line," he whispered through a clenched jaw. The officiant looked flustered. "I'm sorry, my dear." Elara looked past Julian, her gaze sweeping over the room, over all the people who had judged her, dismissed her, and laughed at her. Then her eyes locked with his. "I have just cause," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. "We cannot be married, because this man, Julian Blackwood, is a fraud, and he is a thief." A collective gasp went through the room. Beatrice shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury. "What is the meaning of this? Elara, have you lost your mind?" Julian grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his handsome face twisting into an ugly snarl. "You're ruining everything." "No, Julian," she said, pulling her arm from his grasp with a surprising strength. "You ruined everything when you decided to steal my family's legacy. You ruined it when you decided to build your company on lies." She turned to the stunned audience. "The company you all know as Ethelgard Finishes, the name, the story, the formulas that made it famous, they were not his to take. They belonged to my grandfather, Arthur Vance. And now, they belong to me." From the third row, Mr. Davies stood up, a slim briefcase in his hand. He walked calmly and purposefully toward the altar. Julian's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, who was also his best man, moved to intercept him. "Who are you? You can't be up here." Davies simply handed him a document. "I am Marcus Davies, Miss Vance's legal counsel. And this," he said, his voice a calm counterpoint to the rising panic, "is a court-filed notice of transfer of trademark. The name Ethelgard and all associated intellectual property have been reverted to their rightful owner, Miss Elara Vance, based on incontrovertible proof of prior use and creation." Sterling's face went pale as he scanned the document. "This is absurd. The trademark is registered to—" "Fraudulently," Davies cut in smoothly. "Which brings us to the next point. He opened his briefcase and pulled out another file, handing it to a stunned Julian. "This is a cease and desist order. You will immediately stop all production, marketing, and sales under the Ethelgard name. And this," he said, pulling out a third, thicker document, "is a summary of our findings regarding your business practices." Davies turned to the audience, his voice rising to fill the hall. "For the past 2 years, Mr. Blackwood has been knowingly and systematically selling you a defective product. He has been using inferior materials that, according to our lab analysis, will fail, crack, and discolor within a matter of years, causing millions of dollars in damages to the homes and projects he was hired to enhance. He did this while embezzling millions from his own company through a network of shell corporations." The room erupted into chaos. Clients who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Ethelgard products were on their feet, shouting. Julian's face had gone from red with rage to a ghastly, waxy white. He stared at Elara, his expression one of pure, unadulterated hatred and disbelief. You snake!" he sputtered. "I gave you everything!" Elara looked him dead in the eye, the memory of his cruel words at the dinner party giving her the final surge of strength. She took the ridiculous, fluffy bridal bouquet she was holding and dropped it on the floor. "You were right about one thing, Julian," she said, her voice ringing with the cold, clear sound of justice. "You told me I was nothing without you, but the truth is, I was nothing with you. I allowed myself to become small to fit into your world, but I am everything without you, because I am my grandfather's heir. I am the soul of this business. I am Ethelgard, and you," she said, delivering the final, devastating blow. "You are nothing." As if on cue, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 2 uniformed federal marshals and several plainclothes detectives from the district attorney's white-collar crime unit entered the room. The chaos in the room died instantly, replaced by a new, heavier, more terrible silence. The silence of absolute ruin. One of the detectives walked directly up to the altar and addressed a frozen, speechless Julian. "Julian Blackwood, you are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering." The sound Beatrice made was not human. It was a strangled, guttural cry of despair as she watched them snap handcuffs onto her son's wrists at his own wedding altar. Julian didn't struggle. All the fight, all the arrogance had drained out of him. He looked utterly broken, a hollow shell of the man who had stood there just minutes before. As they led him away, his eyes met Elara's one last time. There was no hatred in them now. Only a vast, empty, and complete understanding of his defeat. He had underestimated her. He had believed his own lie that she was nothing, and that mistake had cost him everything. Elara stood there for a moment amidst the wreckage of the wedding, the scent of dying roses, and the shocked silence of the guests. She felt no triumph, no joy, just a profound, quiet, and cleansing sense of release. She had not just taken back a trademark, she had taken back her life. She had protected her grandfather's noble legacy. She turned, her ridiculously expensive train trailing behind her, and walked back down the aisle, away from the ruin and toward an unknown, but finally free, future. Nobody was laughing now. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of legal and social explosions. The story of the wedding that wasn't, and the dramatic arrest of the groom, became the talk of the city's elite. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a sensational tale of a woman scorned, but the underlying details of the corporate fraud gave the story a harder, more serious edge. The name Ethelgard was suddenly infamous. While Julian was processed and held for his bail hearing, Elara was swept into a series of urgent meetings with Mr. Davies. The first order of business was to take control of the company that now legally bore her name. Davies had already filed an emergency injunction, freezing the company's assets to prevent Julian's family from trying to liquidate or hide them. The next day, Elara, dressed not in a wedding gown, but in a sharply tailored business suit she had bought that morning, walked into the main offices of Ethelgard Finishes. She was flanked by Mr. Davies and a small team of forensic accountants. The atmosphere in the office was funereal. Employees huddled in cubicles, whispering and casting anxious glances at the woman they only knew as the boss's pretty, quiet fiancé. Her first act was to call an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. As she stood at the head of the long, polished table, a table, she noted with a grim irony, that was treated with the fraudulent version of her grandfather's finish, she looked out at the faces of the employees. She saw fear, confusion, and resentment. "I know you are all scared and confused," she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified slightly by the room's speaker system. "You have a right to be. What Julian Blackwood did was a betrayal not just to me, but to all of you, and to the very promise of this company." She paused, letting the words sink in. "My name is Elara Vance, and Ethelgard was my grandfather's legacy. I am its creator, and as of yesterday, I am its rightful owner and chief executive officer." A wave of murmurs went through the room. She held up a hand for silence. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking your jobs are gone. You're thinking this company is finished. You are wrong. The company is not finished. It is just beginning. For the first time, it will be run with integrity." She laid out her plan with a clarity that surprised even herself. "We are initiating a complete top-to-bottom recall of all products sold in the last 2 years. It will be expensive. It will be difficult. But it is the only way to restore the honor of the Ethelgard name. We will contact every client, admit our fault, and replace the defective finish with the true, original formula at our own cost." This was her one act of compassion, her one moment of restraint. She was not going to punish the workers or the clients for Julian's sins. She was going to fix what he had broken. "I know the formulas," she continued, her voice resonating with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "I know how to make them properly. I will be personally overseeing the production reformulation in the lab. For those of you who want to be part of a company built on quality and honesty, your jobs are safe. For those of you who were complicit in Mr. Blackwood's fraud, your time here is over." In the days that followed, the true extent of Julian's corruption became clear. The forensic accountants uncovered the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, and the doctored invoices. Several key executives who had helped Julian manage the scheme were summarily fired and would later face their own criminal charges. The rest of the staff, seeing Elara's genuine commitment and deep knowledge of the product, slowly began to shift their allegiance. They saw that she wasn't just an heiress. She was an expert. Beatrice Blackwood tried to fight, of course. She hired a team of aggressive lawyers to challenge the trademark transfer and the asset freeze. They argued that Elara had manipulated Julian, that she was a vindictive woman scorned. But the evidence Davies had compiled was simply overwhelming. The original ledger, with Arthur's dated entry and Elara's 16-year-old signature, was the cornerstone. Coupled with the testimony of material suppliers and the lab reports, the Blackwood case crumbled before it even got to court. They were forced to settle, relinquishing all claims to Ethelgard and its assets. The legal fees and the initial costs of the product recall wiped out a significant portion of the Blackwood family's liquid wealth. The social humiliation did the rest. Beatrice, once a queen of society, became a pariah. Julian's fate was sealed. Faced with a mountain of evidence, He accepted a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial that would have further exposed his family's finances. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. His father, whose construction company was deeply entangled in the scandal, was forced into bankruptcy. The opulent mansion where Elara had been so cruelly humiliated was sold at auction to pay off creditors. One evening, a few months after she had taken over, Elara was working late in her new office, Julian's old office, now redecorated in warmer, more honest tones. Mr. Davies stopped by to deliver the final settlement papers. "It's all done," he said, placing the file on her desk. "They have nothing left to fight with. You won, Elara. You have it all back." Elara looked around the office, at the business plans spread across her desk, at the small, framed photo of her grandfather she had placed on the credenza. "It's not about winning anymore," she said quietly. "It's about building it right this time." Davies nodded, a look of profound respect on his face. "Your grandfather would be proud." He handed her one last envelope. "This came to my office for you. It's from your old friend, Sterling." Elara opened it. It was a single sheet of paper, a bill from Sterling's firm. It was for the time he spent at the initial prenup dinner, advising her. At the bottom, he had written a short, pathetic, handwritten note. "My sincerest apologies for my role in this unfortunate matter. I was simply representing my client." Elara let out a short, sharp laugh, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. She took the bill, wrote "void" across it in thick black marker, and mailed it back to him. It was a petty gesture, but a deeply satisfying one. Mr. Sterling was later brought before the state bar for ethics violations related to his complicity in the fraudulent prenup, a small but significant consequence for his arrogance. In a box of her things sent over from the now-sold Blackwood mansion, she found a small gift she had bought for Julian for the wedding, a beautiful, handcrafted watch. She looked at it for a moment, a symbol of a life and a love that had turned out to be a complete illusion. She didn't smash it or throw it away. She simply sold it and donated the entire sum to a local trade school, setting up a scholarship for young artisans in her grandfather's name. It was a way of turning the last remnants of her past pain into a promise for someone else's future. The cycle of deceit was over. The cycle of creation could begin again. A year passed. The transformation of Ethelgard finishes under Elara's leadership was nothing short of miraculous. The name, once a synonym for scandal, was slowly becoming a beacon of integrity. The product recall, while astronomically expensive, was a stroke of marketing genius. By admitting fault and making it right, Elara had earned the trust of the high-end market in a way Julian's slick salesmanship never could. The story of the company's rebirth, the granddaughter reclaiming her family's legacy from the corrupt man who stole it, was even more compelling than the fiction Julian had spun. Architects and designers, initially wary, were won over by the undeniable quality of the true Ethelgard formula. The finish was richer, more durable, and had a depth that the cheaper version had lacked. It was, as one influential design magazine wrote, the difference between a photograph of a sunset and the sunset itself. Orders began to pour in, not just from new clients, but from former clients who were so impressed with the recall process that they commissioned new projects. Revenue, after the initial dip, soared to 300% of what it had been under Julian. Elara proved to be a natural leader. The quiet, underestimated woman had a core of steel. She had her grandfather's eye for detail and an intuitive understanding of the brand's soul. She instituted an employee profit-sharing program, believing that everyone who contributed to the company's success should benefit from it. Morale skyrocketed. The fear that had permeated the office under Julian was replaced by a vibrant, collaborative energy. She spent at least 1 day a week in the lab and the workshop, her hands dusty with pigments and smelling of tung oil, working alongside her chemists and artisans. She was not just a CEO in an office. She was the heart of the company. Her personal life had also found a new, quiet rhythm. The trauma of Julian's betrayal had left its scars, but she was healing. She found joy in simple things: walking her dog in the park, having long dinners with Chloe, and spending weekends in her grandfather's old workshop, which she had lovingly restored. It was no longer a place of sad memories, but a sanctuary of creation. One afternoon, she was meeting with an architect about a new project, a sustainable library being built for a local university. The architect, a man named Liam, was in his late 30s with kind eyes and a calm, thoughtful demeanor. He was known for his innovative designs that blended modernism with natural materials. He wasn't just looking at her as the CEO of a supplier company. He was truly listening to her ideas about how the wood finishes could complement his design. "I've been following what you've done with Ethelgard," he said as they walked through the construction site. "It's remarkable. Not just the business turnaround, but the commitment to the craft. You can feel the integrity in the product now. It has a soul." Elara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "It always did," she replied. "It just got lost for a while." Their professional relationship slowly blossomed into a personal one. Liam was the antithesis of Julian. He was patient, respectful, and genuinely fascinated by her mind, her passion for her work, and her resilience. He wasn't impressed by her wealth. He was a successful architect in his own right. He was impressed by her. He loved to hear her talk about the chemistry of the formulas, the history of the woods she worked with. With him, she felt seen and valued for who she was, not for what she could provide. About 18 months after the wedding debacle, Chloe sent her a link to a tabloid news article with the subject line, "Thought you'd enjoy this." The headline read, "Disgraced socialite Beatrice Blackwood, now working as a department store greeter." There was a grainy photo of Julian's mother, her face drawn and tired, wearing the store's uniform, a forced, brittle smile on her face. She had lost everything: her fortune, her status, her home. All that was left was the public shame. Elara looked at the photo and felt a surprising lack of emotion. There was no schadenfreude, no pleasure in the woman's downfall. There was just a quiet sense of closure. The consequences had been total and complete. A few months after that, she received a letter from the federal prison where Julian was incarcerated. She recognized his handwriting on the envelope immediately. Her first instinct was to throw it away, unread. But curiosity got the better of her. She slid it open with a letter opener, her hand steady. The letter was a rambling, self-pitying mess. He wrote about the horrors of prison, about how he had lost everything. He claimed he had always loved her, that he had just gotten carried away by ambition. He begged for her forgiveness. But it was the last paragraph that showed he had learned nothing at all. "If you could just find it in your heart to help me, Elara. A statement to the parole board, perhaps. Or some financial assistance for when I get out. After all, you wouldn't have any of this if it weren't for me taking your grandfather's little hobby and turning it into a real business." Elara read that last sentence, and a slow, cold smile touched her lips. He still didn't get it. He still thought he was the hero of the story. She took the letter, walked over to the industrial shredder in her office, and fed it into the machine. She watched as his words were turned into meaningless, powerless strips of paper. That was the last time she ever thought about Julian Blackwood. One crisp autumn evening, Liam took her back to her grandfather's workshop. He had spent the last few months secretly working on a project there. He led her inside, and she gasped. He had transformed a section of it into a beautiful, modern design studio for her, with perfect lighting, organized shelves for her materials, and a large drafting table overlooking the garden. But he had carefully preserved the old, dusty part of the workshop where her grandfather's workbench and tools still sat, creating a seamless blend of past and future. "I thought you should have a space that honors both where you came from," he said softly, "and where you're going." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. She looked from her grandfather's old, worn workbench to the sleek new studio, and she understood. She didn't have to choose between being Arthur Vance's heir and being Elara Vance, the CEO. She could be both. She stood there, in the heart of her legacy, her hand in Liam's, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been brutal, a trial by fire that had burned away her naivety and left behind a core of unshakable strength. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that her value was not something to be granted or validated by someone else. It was not a gift to be given away or a prize to be won by a charming suitor. It was, and always had been, her own inherent property. She had learned to stop accepting disrespect as a form of affection, to stop making herself smaller to protect a man's fragile ego. The world had told her she brought nothing to the table. She had learned, in the end, that she owned the table, the house it was in, and the very formula for the polish that made it shine. She was living the life she truly deserved, a life she had not been given, but had reclaimed.